Have you ever felt that unsettling knot in your stomach? That quickening pulse? Not because of something obvious, like clear danger right there, but more a vague sense of unease about the unknown. Or maybe, the other way around. That primal, immediate jolt of alarm when something sudden happens, really obvious threat.
Right.
We've all been there, right? That kind of fundamental human thing, apprehension, often before we even really get why.
Exactly. And those are two very distinct feelings, aren't they? We often mix them up. But today we're going to untangle them a bit. Look at what's really going on underneath.
Yeah, and that's our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into this really complex, multifaceted human experience of fear. And also its philosophical cousin, you could say, dread or angst.
Yeah.
We're going to try and peel back the layers of this, fundamental emotion. Look at its ancient roots, the hard science behind it, and, the huge impact it has on our lives, from our own personal struggles right up to, massive societal shifts it can cause.
hmm And for this deep dive, we've pulled together a really fascinating mix of sources. It's quite a stack. Our foundation comes from some pretty rigorous philosophical writings that gives us the history, the concepts. We layer on these in-depth psychological research articles that get into the nitty-gritty of the mind and body. And finally, we've even got some profound literary analyses. Because sometimes art just captures that raw human feeling, in ways science can't quite.
Right. That mix lets us get a really well-rounded picture, doesn't it? We're not just skimming the surface, we're aiming to go deep. So our mission today is to help you unpack what all this stuff reveals. Not just, okay, what's the definition of fear? But more importantly, why do we even feel it? How do all its different forms affect us? And crucially, how can we maybe navigate it better or even overcome the really detrimental parts in our own lives? We're aiming for those sort of aha moments, where the information clicks and becomes personal insight, giving you a kind of thoughtful shortcut to being really well informed on this core human emotion.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking the core ideas. Specifically, let's try to pull apart fear and dread. As you might know, there's this really influential 19th century Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, existentialist, theologian. He's really the main figure who philosophically defined dread, or angst as he called it. His insights were just, pivotal. They really shaped how we understand this concept now, separating it clearly from what we usually just call fear.
That feels like such a crucial place to start. So let's really nail down that difference. According to our sources, fear is, it's specific, an emotional response when we face something known, something potentially harmful or dangerous. Think about facing a wild animal, or maybe a really angry dog, or even, public speaking, fearing what people might think, the ridicule. In all those cases, the thing you're afraid of. It's identifiable, concrete, you can point right at it. That seems to be the key thing. It's an alarm, but with a clear target.
Precisely. And this is where dread or angst is completely different. A stark contrast. The essential difference. There's a complete absence of a tangible object, something specific to fear. Dread is described more as this deep spiritual anxiety. It arises just from facing your own freedom, your own inherent freedom, and all the vast unknown possibilities that come with that freedom. It's a feeling without a clear target, like a kind of dizziness when you look into the void of endless choice. It's not about what might happen specifically, but the overwhelming weight that anything could happen. And it's your choice, your responsibility.
Okay, so let me try and make that super clear for you listening. Imagine you see a growling dog right in front of you. That sudden surge of adrenaline, that racing heart, that's fear. The threat is clear, it's present, you know exactly what you're scared of that dog. But dread, or angst, that's that unsettling feeling, the one without an object, like when you're just thinking about the overwhelming responsibility of having so many choices in life, or the huge, unformed future stretching out ahead. It's that feeling of total freedom, maybe standing on the edge of, infinite possibilities, knowing you have to choose. And there's no single thing you can point to and say, that's what's making me uncomfortable. It's more the weight of existence itself.
Now, moving beyond that specific philosophical distinction for a moment, fear, in its broader sense, is presented as one of the fundamental human emotions, basic building block stuff. It's described as a feeling state made up of interconnected parts, physiological, cognitive, behavioral. They all work together. And it's highly individual, deeply subjective. What terrifies one person might be a thrill for another. Roller coasters, right? It's actually kind of remarkable. Our sources mention there are over 550 English words related to emotion. Yet, despite all that vocabulary, people often really struggle to describe their emotions adequately, including fear. It can be hard to put into words.
That really is surprising, isn't it? You'd think with 550 words we'd be better at it. So at its core, fear arises as a reaction to any perceived danger or threat, or even just not understanding something well enough. And this is critical. The sources really emphasize that whether the threat is actually real or just imagined, it doesn't matter for that initial feeling, that initial nervousness. It kicks in anyway. Your body reacts first, right? Before your brain fully checks if the snake is real or just a stick.
Absolutely. And that initial reaction,
Mm.
it has profound effects.
Yeah.
Fear impacts your perceptions. It literally changes how you see the world around you.
Yeah.
It can skew your emotional state, make you more irritable, maybe withdrawn, and it deeply shapes your behavior afterwards across all sorts of situations towards different things. It's almost like wearing fear-tinted glasses. Everything gets filtered through it, how you cross the street, how you talk to people, everything.
And it can be quite sneaky too, can it? Fear can show up consciously, like with that growling dog example, very direct response to something specific. But it can also exist implicitly, experienced subconsciously, a bit like general anxiety. You might just feel that persistent knot in your stomach, but you can't pinpoint why. And it can be super brief, just a flash of alarm that vanishes quickly, or it can linger for ages, days, or weeks, this background hum of unease. Sometimes people feeling it might not even be immediately aware that they're afraid. They only notice the physical symptoms or realize it later, like a ghost in the machine, you said.
Yeah, and what's fascinating there is this idea that fear often points towards the future. It's that apprehension about what might happen, especially when the outcome is uncertain. And we tend to imagine the worst. Will I get that job? Will I be safe walking home? That forward-looking part is tied right into its evolutionary job, though it can also be triggered by past events too. Antecedent events, the sources call them. Past trauma can definitely fuel future fears. It creates this feedback loop, sometimes protective, sometimes not so much.
Okay, so why do we even have it? What's the big evolutionary picture here? Let's dig into the biological and evolutionary role because, wow, the sources really stress how crucial fear has been. For our evolution, for our survival day to day, it basically heightens our awareness dramatically. It's like this internal alarm saying, hey, expectations aren't matching reality here, potential danger. It's the ultimate internal warning system, basically designed to keep us alive. And that warning system triggers a whole suite of physiological reactions. It's quite a list. When you're in a state of fear, your body just goes into overdrive. You might feel dizzy, lightheaded, blood rushing away from the head to the big muscles, right? You might feel like you're choking or get short of breath as your airways tighten up, preparing to gasp or shout, sweating, feeling sick or actually vomiting, numbness, shaking. These are all common, visible signs. And these internal body reactions, they give direct feedback. They scream, you are afraid, and push you, compel you to get away from whatever's causing it. It's your body's incredibly smart, primal way of saying, danger, move now.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. While loads of our fears are learned, like maybe you develop a fear of dogs after being bitten or public speaking after a bad experience, the actual capacity to feel fear, that's innate. It's baked into our DNA. And this leads to something psychologists call preparedness.
Yeah, so preparedness.
Yeah. It suggests certain fears like snakes, spiders, heights, acrophobia are way more common.
Yeah.
And they're easier to trigger, even in lab settings.
The theory is this is genetic, a direct result of natural selection. Think about it. Early humans who had a quick, strong fear response to a snake or a cliff edge, they were just more likely to survive and pass on those genes.
It conferred a clear, undeniable survival advantage, passed down through countless generations. And from an evolutionary psychology angle, the idea is that different fears might actually represent different adaptations from different times in our past, reflecting the specific threats our ancestors faced way back when. So some fears, like acrophobia, fear of heights, might be common to basically all mammals, developed way back in the Mesozoic maybe, when early mammals were navigating trees or cliffs. Other fears, like snakes, may be more common to primates, developing in the Cenozoic era when venomous snakes were a constant deadly threat.
And then you have fears that might be more uniquely human, developed more recently, say, Paleolithic, Neolithic periods. This is when things like mice and insects became major carriers of disease, or threats to stored food, which was vital for early farming communities.
Exactly. So the fear of a big predator could be ancient, mammalian, but that slight revulsion or fear around flies buzzing over food, that might be a more recent human adaptation linked to avoiding sickness.
Wow. So our fears are like this layered history book of our species' journey, each fear a marker of a past danger. That's fascinating.
Now, shifting gears a bit from the biology back to philosophy, It's clear that fear wasn't just something modern thinkers stumbled upon. It has really deep roots in human thought. Our sources point out it was a huge theme in ancient Greek epic poetry and theater. Think of all those tragic heroes wrestling with their fates and fears. And it wasn't just artists. Biographers, historians, philosophers, even doctors back then were analyzing it meticulously. It was clearly central to their understanding of being human, even thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and Aristotle, the big name in ancient philosophy, he had a very structured view. He liked thinking in opposites, right? Reducing complexity to pairs.
That dualistic approach.
So he saw fear as the direct opposite of hope. He defined fear as anticipating evil. And evil wasn't just some abstract thing, it was concrete stuff. Poverty, having no friends, disgrace, agony, and of course death.
Right, the bad things that could happen.
And for Aristotle, excellence or virtue was all about being able to overcome these powerful emotions through virtuous actions, especially bravery, acting right despite feeling wrong.
And this is a really key distinction, I think. It often gets missed. Aristotle did not see fearlessness as a virtue. He wasn't saying don't feel fear. No, a truly courageous person, in his view, feels the fear, acknowledges it, but actively overcomes it. They act despite it.
Okay, so it's not about lacking fear, it's about mastering it.
Exactly. And that mastery, that bravery, was directly linked to achieving happiness, or eudaimonia as he called it, that deep flourishing life, which he saw as the ongoing practice of complete virtue. So you achieve happiness by acting virtuously despite fear, not in its absence, which honestly feels much more realistic and powerful, doesn't it?
It really does. Then there was Epicurus, another hugely influential Greek philosopher. He was really focused on human well-being, and he thought fear was the main thing holding people back from happiness.
Right, he saw fear as the primary source of suffering.
So he explored common fears and anxieties in this very practical, almost teacherly way, like an ancient self-help guide. His goal was to ease suffering by understanding its roots.
Then one of his followers, Diogenes of Lanuanda, took this further. He made this interesting distinction, identifying two types of fear, according to Epicurean thought. The first type is basically our standard understanding of fear, like avoiding something obviously dangerous, a falling rock or whatever.
Right.
Simple, rational avoidance.
Okay.
But the second type, and this is really striking, is more like a vague internal anxiety, hidden inside, making the danger hard to escape because there's no clear external thing to avoid.
Ah.
In that description, it sounds remarkably like modern definitions of generalized anxiety disorder. Shows incredible insight into psychological complexity way back then, like they were already describing free-floating anxiety.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, then the Stoics. Another major Hellenistic philosophical school founded by Zeno of Citium. They had a different, very pragmatic take on fear. Their core teaching was almost bracingly logical. It's illogical, even foolish, to fear anything you can't control.
The famous Stoic dichotomy of control.
Exactly. This ties right into their idea of destiny or fate. They believe the universe runs according to a divine reason. Everything is predetermined.
So, fearing something like death, completely illogical to a Stoic, because mortality is just part of the natural order, an inherent feature of being human, part of the cosmic plan. Why waste energy or worrying about the inevitable?
Mm-hmm. So the Stoic path to pleasure, or maybe better put, tranquility, wasn't about chasing highs, it was about following reason. They believe that using our reason diligently, disciplining our thoughts, protects us from irrational emotions and helps us navigate external threats calmly. If it's outside your control, the weather, other people's opinions, even death itself, then worrying is pointless. It disrupts your inner peace, your virtue. It's all about building this inner fortress of calm that external events just can't breach. Okay, let's jump forward dramatically now to the 20th century. This is when we see the huge emergence of the existentialist movement, not just in philosophy, but massively in arts and literature, too. Think of huge figures like Jean-Paul Sartre or Franz Kafka. They really brought that concept of angst right into the mainstream, giving voice to a very modern kind of anxiety.
Sartre, yeah. In his novels like Nausea, he really dug into this idea of dread. He used these vivid fictional characters caught in these profound existential crises, showing how that anxiety bubbling up from their own sheer freedom could be this central, almost paralyzing experience. For Sartre, it wasn't about fearing specific things in the world, but the terrifying vastness and responsibility of creating meaning in a universe that doesn't offer any ready-made. The burden of choice.
And then, oh man, Kafka, maybe the ultimate writer of existential angst from that period. In so many of his stories at the trial, Kafka just nails that angst of the human condition with such clarity, but also this weird, unsettling humor sometimes.
Yeah, that bureaucratic nightmare feeling.
Exactly. His characters face these bizarre, incomprehensible systems, these judgments that make no sense. It highlights the absurdity, the inherent anxiety of just being,
Hmm.
trying to navigate a legal system that's totally opaque or waking up as a giant bug. It's this deep, dark, sometimes funny exploration of dread.
And this wasn't just a European thing. Over in the United States, too, this theme of existential angst pops up a lot in literature. Think of Saul Bellow's characters. They're often grappling with this deep sense of alienation or absurdity, feeling lost in a changing world. And of course, J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, often seen as a classic of the angst genre, right? Especially capturing that teenage disillusionment, that anxiety about phoniness in the adult world. It hit a nerve with so many people feeling similar things.
So what's the big takeaway from this existentialist view of fear? For these thinkers, and it's a whole constellation, Freud, Pascal, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard again, Heidegger fear, especially loneliness, that homo solus idea, the solitary human, it points to this kind of endless ratio, they called it, between our subjective experience, objective reality, and what science can tell us.
That gap.
Yeah, and it highlights how life is always sort of slippery, meaning isn't fixed, it keeps shifting.
So for these philosophers, fear wasn't just a psychological issue. It tapped into fundamental questions about being, ontology, reality, metaphysics, and how we should live ethics. Dimensions they felt other fields often missed. It's about our very place in the cosmos. Now, moving beyond the individual, fear has also played a massive role historically in politics. In theory and in practice, Thomas Hobbes, for instance, famously argued that the fear of the state of nature, that life without rules would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, that fear is the main reason we create governments in the first place.
Right, the social contract idea.
Exactly. He argued that without a strong central power, life would just be this constant, terrifying free-for-all.
So the idea is we choose to join society, form a government, and we kind of give up some individual freedom, including our own ability to, make others fear us.
Yes, and in return, we grant the state a monopoly on using fear, basically.
Yeah.
Through laws, police, courts.
Which is seen as necessary for protection, for order.
Right. Without that power to enforce rules and keep people safe, the state can't function. But it's a tricky balance, isn't it?
Totally. Too much state power, and the state itself becomes the thing people fear, rather than their protector.
And this leads us right into this really important concept, a fear culture. Our sources define this as when fear is deliberately engineered.
Right.
Created by individuals or groups, specifically to manipulate other people's emotions, usually negatively.
Wow, so it's intentional manipulation.
Yes, and there's this emerging field, the philosophy of fear, that's specifically trying to understand and counteract this kind of manipulative fear, to empower people against it.
That's pretty sobering, that fear can be weaponized like that for political or cultural gain. Used to get people to accept ideas they'd normally reject, or turn them against ideas they might otherwise support.
Absolutely. Think about during a crisis. A government might manage public fear by offering quick explanations, even if they're shaky. Or, unfortunately, sometimes by blaming a minority group to create a common enemy.
Wow.
Or they might subtly shift historical narratives, adjust past beliefs to fit a new, fear-driven agenda.
So a culture of fear is more than just feeling scared. It's like this pervasive environment where fear and worry are deliberately cranked up.
Exactly, amplified to dominate the political conversation through deliberate manipulation. And this kind of engineered atmosphere can breed instability, anxiety, a sense of chaos. It can make rational people act irrationally, driven by panic instead of reason.
And it can come from real scary events, but also just from myths or exaggerated threats spread by people trying to control us, or even make money off our fear.
Precisely. It can be fueled by reality or by carefully crafted fiction pushed by various agents, politicians, media, interest groups.
This makes me think about another distinction the sources mentioned: external versus internal causes of fear. External is like something real out there, a hurricane, an invading army.
Right, something present in society.
But internal is more like an idea, a belief, a memory, not a tangible thing.
Exactly. And fears with those internal roots,
Yeah.
they are particularly vulnerable to manipulation because they're already loaded with personal meaning.
So you don't even need a real event, just hammering on the right idea. Conspiracy theory, a historical grievance can be just as powerful.
Potentially even more so. Ultimately, the sources say there aren't really universal triggers for all societal fears. Different events, uncertainties, opinions can all create fear. And it can be political or totally non-political. It's complex.
Okay, let's pivot now to the really fascinating science of fear, how our actual brains and bodies react. This gives us a totally different window, doesn't it?
It really does. Our sources map out this intricate network of brain regions in humans, but also in other animals too, involved in figuring out and processing fear. You've got the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, hypothalamus, sensory cortex, hippocampus, thalamus, septum, brainstem. It's not just one spot. It's a whole coordinated system.
And in that system, the amygdala is like the superstar, right? The main conductor of the fear orchestra.
That's a great way to put it. The sources really hammer home its critical importance. It's got these extensive two-way communication lines with other brain areas, like a high-speed data link, especially via something called the ventral amygdala fugal pathway. This helps us learn from frightening experiences really quickly, remember them, and act fast next time. It's essentially the brain's central alarm system constantly scanning for danger and triggering the immediate response.
And when that alarm goes off, there's this super fast sequence, right, to generate the emotion.
Signals flash between these different brain regions almost instantly, which then kicks the sympathetic nervous system into gear that's our body's emergency mode. And that activation leads to those classic responses. Flight, fight, freeze, fright, and faint, all geared towards immediate survival.
Heart pounds, breath quickens, muscles tense, all getting you ready to run, confront, or hide.
And what happens if that main alarm bell, the amygdala, gets damaged?
Oh yeah, the sources had that incredible example, patient SM.
Right. A person whose amygdala was damaged by a rare genetic condition. And the result was this profound inability to recognize or even feel fear.
The consequences are just wild, aren't they? Like they lack fear, become overly confident.
Potentially confronting people much bigger than them without hesitation, or even walking right up to dangerous animals like venomous snakes with zero apprehension.
Imagine walking towards a lion like it's a kitten. It just shows how vital that tiny bit of brain is for keeping us safe.
And while the amygdala is central, other brain bits light up too when we see fearful faces versus neutral ones. Shows how complex processing social fear cues is. Specifically, areas in the occipitocerebellar regions, like the fusiform gyrus and parts of the parietal and temporal gyri, and get this, the sources say fearful eyes, fearful brows, and a fearful mouth seem to trigger different parts of this network separately.
Wow, so we process the different parts of a scared face distinctly. That's nuance, allows us to quickly gauge threat from just a glance.
What's also mind-blowing is how external factors can actually change amygdala activity. Shows how our bodies, and even other creatures, can be manipulated by fear signals, like that parasite, Toxoplasma gondii. It needs to get into cats to reproduce.
Oh, this is a crazy one.
Yeah. It infects rats and actually suppresses their amygdala activity, makes them less afraid of cats. They even start seeking out areas marked by cat urine.
So they basically walk right up to the cat and get eaten, and the parasite wins.
Exactly. Terrifying example of nature manipulating fear for its own ends.
But on the flip side, hormones like oxytocin, the love hormone, that can actually reduce activity in the fear center.
Right. Shows how positive chemical signals can also tweak our fear responses. It's not all negative manipulation.
Okay, this leads nicely into species-specific defense reactions, SSDRs, and avoidance learning.
Right. SSDRs are basically these innate or at least highly conserved tendencies that animals and humans have to avoid certain threats. They're like hardwired, automatic survival instincts. Super important for reacting instantly to common dangers without needing to stop and think.
And they mainly come in 3 flavors, right? Flight, run away. Fight, which can include bluffing, like puffing up. And freeze, staying totally still to avoid being seen.
All controlled by that sympathetic nervous system. Ready to go in a split second, often before we're even consciously aware of the threat.
And while they might be innate, the sources say they're learned incredibly quickly, too.
Yeah, through watching other, like seeing your parent freak out about something or interacting with other species or just directly with the environment. And crucially, once these reactions are learned, they stick. They're not easily forgotten. Shows how vital they are for survival. Once you learn what's dangerous, you tend to remember it.
You've probably felt this yourself. The sources give that great example.
Yeah.
You see something snake-like on the path, maybe just a stick or a hose, and you jump back instantly before your brain even registers, oh, it's just a stick.
Exactly. That's a precognitive SSDR firing off. Shows how fast our brains prioritize potential threats over accuracy sometimes. Millennia of evolution right there.
And there was that researcher, Robert C. Bullis, back in 1970.
Yes, University of Washington. He really pioneered the theory of SSDRs. He found animal responses often depend more on getting a safety signal, a cue that the danger isn't present, than on the scary stimulus itself. He also noted the importance of internal feedback body sensations, like heart rate over external cues in these reactions. And he thought SSDRs were learned through Pavlovian conditioning associating stimuli with bad events, rather than operant conditioning, which is about rewards and punishments.
And another guy, Michael Fanselo, did experiments showing rats in shock situations reacted based on instinct, their built-in defensive topography, not just the context.
Right. Their bodies just seem to know the right defensive moves, overriding a more nuanced read of the situation. Further support for that hardwired SSCR idea.
And the genetic link is just incredible, that example of rats missing the Stathman gene.
Astounding, isn't it? No avoidance learning, virtually no fear. They'll walk straight up to cats and get eaten because that innate fear circuit is broken. And you see these SSDRs across so many species. Rats, chimps, prairie dogs, us. All designed to boost the odds of surviving long enough to reproduce in a dangerous world. Fear, in this sense, gets learned through experience or watching others, helping us identify and avoid threats, ensuring the species continues.
Okay, so beyond these brain structures and instincts, fear also unleashes these incredibly powerful chemical signals inside us, hormones, right?
Absolutely. During that fight or flight state, it's like a hormonal flood takes over, prepping us for action. You've got epinephrine adrenaline surging through you, regulates heart rate metabolism, opens up blood vessels and airways to get oxygen pumping to muscles and brain.
That's the big rush you feel.
Then norepinephrine works with it, ramps up heart rate even more, boosts blood flow to muscles, triggers glucose release from energy stores, that immediate, intense burst of energy. Then there's cortisol, the stress hormone. Increases blood sugar, mobilizes certain white blood cells, potential injury, affects calcium, prepares the body for sustained stress, potential damage. It's a whole chemical cocktail for survival.
And after the scary event is over, the brain gets busy recording it, right? The amygdala and hippocampus, using synaptic plasticity.
Exactly. Synaptic plasticity is like the brain strengthening or weakening connections between neurons based on experience. So after a fright, your brain literally rewires itself slightly. Those connections related to the fear get stronger, making sure you remember.
So you don't make the same mistake twice.
Precisely. Stimulation in the hippocampus, especially, leads to really vivid memories of the situation's details. What it looked like, sounded like, smelled like, helps us avoid it next time. And experiments confirm the synaptic plasticity in neurons, leading to the lateral amygdala during fear conditioning. Shows how these fear memories get physically etched into the brain circuitry.
But this process, while usually helpful, can sometimes go wrong. Lead to permanent fear responses, like PTSD or phobias.
Unfortunately, yes. It's like the fear learning system becomes hypersensitive, or the off switch gets broken, the alarm stays on. And brain scans, MRI and fMRI, have actually shown the amygdala in people with conditions like bipolar or panic disorder can be physically larger, or seem wired for a higher level of fear, overreacting to perceived threats. It's a tangible difference.
Oh, okay. Moving to even more subtle chemical signals, not just inside us, but between individuals. Pheromones.
Yes, alarm pheromones. Our sources highlight that when threatened, a huge range of animals, insects, fish, birds, reptiles, mammals, release these specific odor chemicals. Originally called alarm substances, now we call them alarm pheromones. They serve a dual purpose, help the individual defend itself, but also, crucially, warn others of the same species about the danger.
A chemical whisper, you called it.
Exactly, leading to visible behavior changes in the recipient's freezing, getting defensive, scattering.
And the discovery timeline is interesting, too. First found in ants and earthworms back in 68, then mice and rats in 72.
And our understanding of mammalian alarm pheromones really took off after 1990 as the science got better. And the effects can be pretty dramatic. Back in 1985, they found odors from stressed rats actually caused unstressed rats to produce their own natural painkillers, opioid-mediated analgesia, reduced their pain sensitivity just from smelling fear.
Wow.
And in 97, similar thing with bees. Exposure to a bee alarm pheromone made them less sensitive to pain, mediated by an endorphin. Shows a common ancient pathway for coping with threats via chemical signals.
The first specific mammalian alarm substance was pinned down in 1990 using that forced swim test in rats.
That's right. And by 91, it met all the scientific criteria for a pheromone. Clear behavioral effect, species-specific, minimal influence from experience, controlled for general arousal, confirmed it was a specific chemical signal. Studies even showed it wasn't very volatile, meaning the warning smell would linger.
And the brain pathway for perceiving these in rats involves ancient structures: hypothalamus, brainstem, amygdala, similar to humans.
Exactly. Deep evolutionary old parts of the brain involved in fight or flight suggests a shared primal response across mammals. And impressively, this knowledge gets applied. They use alarm pheromone-induced anxiety in rats as a unique model to test anti-anxiety drugs for humans.
Really?
Yeah. Pre-treating rats with clinical drugs like midazolam, propranolol, and others successfully reduced their anxiety in response to the pheromones, offers a really useful tool for developing human treatments.
And the genetics behind it are so precise. That example of mice with a faulty gene, MAPK7, impaired their ability to detect pheromones. Affected things like aggression and mating, too. Suggests a defective detection of specific pheromones, showing a critical genetic link to how these signals are processed and dictate basic behaviors. It's deep in the code. Then there's this fascinating idea of social buffering.
It's when an acute fear response is lessened if a friendly individual, an affiliative conspecific, is present offering support. It's like the psychological buffering hypothesis. Social support mitigates stress. Here, they found olfactory signals actually mediate this buffering in male rats, suggesting a social pheromone of comfort or safety.
A chemical signal for it's okay.
Possibly. And they saw something similar in honeybees. Disturbed colonies were less aggressive under threat if they had this social buffering, suggesting adaptation, not just getting used to it, reinforcing collective safety through chemistry.
And biologists even suggested fear pheromones might be molecules of keystone significance, like keystone species in ecology.
Yeah, proposed in 2012. Meaning these tiny chemicals might disproportionately affect whole species compositions and energy flow within an ecological community. Critical chemical linchpins for how natural systems work.
So what about humans? Do we have alarm pheromones?
Well, they haven't been physically isolated or chemically identified, quite like in animals. But the evidence is definitely mounting for their presence and influence. A leading candidate is androstadione. It's a steroid-like odorant found in human sweat, armpit hair, plasma. And a related compound, androstenone, seems involved in communicating dominance or aggression. Interestingly, sex hormones affect how we perceive it. High testosterone in men linked to finding it unpleasant. High estradiol in women linked to disliking it. Hints at subconscious chemical signaling between us.
And that German study from 2006 sounds incredible. They collected sweat from people who were anxious.
Yeah, pooled sweat from stressed individuals. Then had participants smell it. Some could distinguish it from exercise sweat or just air. But the key finding, the startle reflex, the involuntary eye blink to a sudden sound, was significantly bigger when people were smelling the anxiety sweat compared to exercise sweat.
Even if they weren't consciously aware of why they were more startled.
Yes, exactly. First demonstration that these fear chemosignals can tweak our startle reflex without conscious emotional awareness. It primes our defensive behavior subconsciously. Our bodies react to others' fear before our minds catch up.
Wow. And connecting back to the social buffering in animals, smelling someone else's anxiety can actually induce empathy in humans too.
Seems so. When we subconsciously pick up these fear signals, it can trigger an empathetic response. Suggests a shared, deep mechanism for emotional contagion, maybe even social bonding. We're connected in ways we don't even realize through scent.
And there are even gender differences. A 2013 study with brain imaging.
Right. Sweat from stressed men produced similar emotional responses in both men and women. But, and here's the twist, sweat from stressed women produced a markedly stronger arousal response in other women compared to men.
Really?
Yeah. Brain scans pinpointed this difference to the right amygdala, specifically its superficial nuclei. Very precise. And since there wasn't a difference in the olfactory bulb itself, it suggests the differences in processing the meaning of the cue. The emotional significance, not just its strength. It's about interpreting the fear signal differently.
Amazing. And that last experiment, smelling androstenedione masked with clove oil, made people react faster to angry faces.
Yes, in an approach avoidance task. Interpreted as androstenedione activating the fear system, maybe altering how we process emotional faces, since it affects the fusiform gyrus, which is key for face recognition, shows our sense of smell is tied into our fear responses and social perception in really deep, often subconscious ways. It's not just about nice or nasty smells.
Oh, okay, let's pull this back into the modern world now. How does fear show up today? Both the bad stuff and maybe, surprisingly, some good. Thinking about recent societal fears, COVID-19 is just unavoidable, isn't it?
Absolutely. A prime example. The intense fear of the pandemic led governments worldwide to enact really stringent rules, lockdowns, long self-isolation periods, trying to stop the spread, which of course had huge negative impacts on people's lives, especially in places with fewer resources, like parts of Africa, Latin America, Asia, made tough situations even tougher.
And on a personal level, people's fear seemed rooted in just not knowing, right? Uncertainty about how it spread, the changing variants, whether the vaccines really worked.
Exactly. That widespread uncertainty, fueled by a constant, often confusing stream of information, created this perfect storm for anxiety, not just about getting sick, but about everything: jobs, the future, daily life.
And the psychological toll was immense. We saw studies linking fear of COVID-19 strongly with anxiety and also depression.
They even developed specific scales to measure it, like the FCV-19S, and it correlated with other mental health scales, the constant high numbers of cases, deaths, the media bombardment. It all significantly fed into mood disorders and fear, especially clear in early research from China when it first hit. It was like a global wave of collective fear and uncertainty. Another really stark, ongoing example of fear's power in our times is the Russo-Ukrainian war. Many commentators argue that fear is actually Putin's most effective weapon against Ukraine and against the West.
How so?
Well, think about the strategic threats to cut off energy supplies to Europe, retaliation for proposed price caps on Russian oil and gas. That deliberate energy crisis pushed many countries towards recession, leveraging the fear of economic collapse.
Right, using energy as a weapon of fear.
Precisely. And while the U.S. ramped up gas exports to help, there's domestic pressure there too about keeping supplies for winter. It's a complex global game played with fear and resources, and Putin can still sell elsewhere, even at a discount, offsetting losses. Shows a calculated manipulation of fear in the global market.
And then there's the ultimate fear tactic, the nuclear threat. That hangs over everything.
It really does. Huge concern that Russia might consider using tactical nukes if they feel backed into a corner militarily, especially with Ukraine getting Western support. Putin has made repeated threats about using nukes if Russia's goals are thwarted, and annexing Ukrainian regions gives this veneer of an excuse defending our territory. Plus, the stark fact remains: Russia has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. It's a constant, terrifying shadow cast over global politics.
So these kinds of horrific events, pandemics, wars, they just keep impacting everything, leaving the world feeling almost traumatized.
That's what the sources suggest. This pervasive condition due to widespread fears: war, terrorism, natural disasters, disease, crime, violence. Fear feels like this constant backdrop to modern life, shaping our collective psyche.
But here's the really interesting twist we need to explore, the positive side of fear. It sounds counterintuitive, but there's this contemporary philosophical movement, fearism or fearology, started by a Nepalese philosopher, Desh Suba, back in '99.
Right, fearism.
His big claim is bold. Life is conducted, directed, and controlled by fear.
And other philosophers in this area, like Michael Bassi-Neo, agree fear has both positive and negative sides. And unlike the ancient Greeks, who mostly saw fear negatively, looking at its positive role is seen as really crucial in modern studies. It forces a rethink.
So how can fear be positive? The sources argue it's actually spurred us on, driven modern progress, industrial, technological, information growth.
The argument is that fear of the unknown, that deep drive to understand, predict, control, and the primal fear of death have been powerful motivators. Our discomfort with vulnerability pushed us to innovate.
And you can see the results, can't you? Nuclear power, mobile phones, the internet, biotech breakthroughs, easy global travel.
In many ways, these advancements, partly born from fear, have made large parts of the world, especially industrialized nations, much safer and healthier.
Look at the stats the sources give. U.S. life expectancy shot up from around 45 in 1900 to nearly 80 now. Infant mortality plummeted. These are huge gains.
And think about diseases like polio and smallpox. Terrifying scourges now largely controlled by vaccines. Huge public health wins. Water safety has generally improved massively compared to the past, even if air quality is still a big issue. Agriculture improvements mean more food, less fear of famine in many places. Plus, we live in this age of instant information thanks to satellites and the internet. We hear about threats, pandemics, disasters almost immediately, allowing for faster responses, all driven partly by wanting to avoid negative outcomes.
And on that personal level, the fear of getting sick, of dying, that's undeniably been a massive driver for scientists, doctors, pushing medicine and public health forward constantly.
Directly leading to longer lives, better life expectancy globally.
So fear, in this weird, paradoxical way, has actually been this huge engine for progress and preservation, pushing us towards safety and predictability.
But of course, we absolutely cannot ignore the negative side. which is often what we think of first when we hear fear. Negative fear is defined as that strong feeling of danger that makes you feel deeply uncomfortable, uneasy, often seen as illogical or irrational because the feeling is way out of proportion to the actual threat.
Yeah.
And its harmful effects are significant, really far-reaching.
They really are. Chronic negative fear takes a huge physical toll. Sources mention impairment of the immune system makes you more vulnerable to getting sick. It can contribute to serious heart disease, gut problems like ulcers or irritable bowel syndrome, even reduce fertility.
And constant fear can literally speed up aging at a cellular level, potentially lead to premature deaths. It's a heavy physical burden. And beyond the body, it messes with the brain too. Negative fear can hinder forming long-term memories. It can even cause physical damage to key brain areas, especially the hippocampus, vital for memory.
Wow, actual damage.
Yes. And that damage then makes it harder to control fear, trapping someone in this persistent state of anxiety. The world starts to look genuinely terrifying through that lens, and their own memories reinforce that fearful perception. It's a vicious cycle.
And it disrupts our thinking too, right? Our decision-making.
Absolutely. Negative fear messes with the brain's ability to manage emotions, read social cues, think things through before acting, even behave ethically. It basically short-circuits our higher reasoning, leaves us vulnerable to intense emotions, impulsive reactions, makes rational action really difficult, sometimes impossible. We revert to basic survival mode, even when careful thought is needed. And ultimately, severe mental health conditions can result from chronic negative fear. Things like profound exhaustion, clinical depression, and debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So, yeah, while fear can drive progress and protect us, when it becomes negative and unchecked, it's incredibly damaging, affects every single part of a person's life.
Okay, so given this complex picture of fear as protector, driver, and potential destroyer, how do we navigate it? Our sources offer some really compelling strategies, blending ancient wisdom with modern therapy, giving us pathways to build resilience. Let's start with Stoicism again. That ancient blueprint for emotional resilience feels remarkably relevant today.
It really does.
So, just to recap for you listening, Stoicism focuses on eudaimonic virtue ethics. The highest good is virtue or virtus, things like wisdom, courage, justice, self-discipline. And practicing these virtues leads to eudaimonia, that deep inner contentment, flourishing, not just fleeting happiness.
And that core Stoic principle, the dichotomy of control, is so powerful. Distinguishing what's in our control, our thoughts, beliefs, values, actions, from what's outside our control. External events, other people, outcomes. Stoicism says, focus only on what you can control and accept the rest with equanimity. Frees up so much mental energy from pointless worry.
And they place such a huge emphasis on reason, rationality. Stoics believed our unique human capacity is rational thought. We should use it to make ethical choices, guide how we interpret the world.
Right. And applying reason diligently leads to apatheia or ataraxia. Not apathy like we mean it today, but emotional tranquility. Freedom from being jerked around by excessive emotions. Calm clarity, even when things are tough. And those famous Stoics, Seneca with his letters, Epictetus with his practical handbook, the Anxieties, Emperor Marcus Aurelius in his personal meditations, they all helped spread these ideas in ancient Rome. And their writings are still incredibly popular today, full of timeless practical wisdom on living a resilient, virtuous life, no matter what happens.
Okay, now let's jump from ancient philosophy to a modern therapeutic giant. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. It's so widely used now, so well researched. Its roots go back to the mid-20th century, often the first thing recommended for many conditions.
And its origins are interesting. Partly came out of behaviorism, Pavlov, Skinner focusing just on observable behavior and learning principles, how actions get conditioned.
Right.
But then, in the 50s and 60s, cognitive psychology really took off. Psychologists got interested in the internal stuff, how thoughts and beliefs directly shape emotions and behaviors.
That shift was key, wasn't it? Recognizing the mind's role.
Absolutely. It laid the groundwork for CBT.
And Aaron T. Beck, the psychiatrist, is seen as a founder of cognitive therapy, right? Specifically for depression initially.
Yes, in the 60s. His big insight was that it's not events themselves, but people's interpretations and underlying thoughts about events that cause distress. So his therapy focused on identifying and challenging those negative, often irrational thought patterns to improve mood.
And around the same time, Albert Ellis developed rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT.
Right, in the 50s. Another crucial precursor. REBT's premise is similar. Emotional upset comes from our irrational beliefs about things, not the things themselves. Ellis really emphasized disputing, actively changing those beliefs to feel better. Both Beck and Ellis hit on this power of thought independently. Then CBT proper emerged in the 70s and 80s. It basically integrated both cognitive and behavioral principles, highlighting that thoughts, feelings, and actions are all interconnected. You can modify any of them to affect the others and improve mental health.
A holistic approach.
Exactly. And CBT has kept evolving. Now we have variations like CBT for trauma, DBT for intense emotions, MBCT using mindfulness, lots of specialized tools.
And a huge strength of CBT is that it's so evidence-based, isn't it? Tons of studies show it works.
Massively so. Its effectiveness for depression, anxiety disorders, PTSD, and more is really well established through rigorous research. That's why it's so widely accepted, often a first-line treatment. And it's adaptable individual, group, online, self-help. Very versatile. Now, here's where it gets really exciting, and it's key point from our sources, the powerful overlap between Stoicism and CBT. Despite being thousands of years apart, they share these deep fundamental principles and practices. They align remarkably well, complement each other perfectly for boosting well-being and growth.
It's like the ancients had this intuitive grasp of stuff modern psychology later formalized.
Totally. Think about CBT's main tool, identifying and changing irrational thoughts. That's exactly what Stoicism emphasizes with rational thinking and examining your beliefs.
Right. The Stoic practice of cognitive restructuring, challenging irrational beliefs like, this traffic jam is ruining my life, and replacing them with balanced ones, this is annoying, but I can handle it. It's a direct parallel to CBT techniques, incredibly compatible.
And both stress that dichotomy of control, knowing what you can change and what you can't. CBT pushes you to focus on changing your thoughts and behaviors, internal stuff, rather than trying to control external events. Stoicism says the same. Focus on your response to events, not the events themselves. True power lies in your internal reaction.
And Stoicism is all about teaching emotional resilience, right? Controlling disruptive emotions through reason, understanding how emotions work, that fits perfectly with CBT's goal of helping people manage their emotions effectively.
Stoicism teaches accepting what happens externally while maintaining inner peace, ataraxia, even when things are really tough. Finding calm inside regardless of the storm outside. And mindfulness too. CBT often uses mindfulness practices, increasing self-awareness, being non-judgmental about thoughts. Well, Stoicism encouraged a deep kind of mindfulness as well, not just for awareness, but for evaluating thoughts against Stoic principles, spotting those irrational beliefs that CBT can then target.
And that specific Stoic practice, premeditatio malorum, pre-thinking challenges.
Yes. Contemplating potential difficulties before they happen, preparing mentally and emotionally. It complements CBT brilliantly by encouraging a rational, controlled facing of fears before they hit, lessening their power.
And both really value purpose, right? Living according to values.
Definitely. CBT often involves setting goals aligned with personal values. If you integrate Stoicism, you can align those values with Stoic virtues. Wisdom, courage, justice, self-discipline gives a really deep sense of purpose, consistent with Stoic ethics and that pursuit of eudaimonia, living meaningfully.
So ultimately, both CBT and Stoicism are about self-improvement, growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
CBT targets changing maladaptive patterns. Stoicism promotes developing character and wisdom. And many therapists now deliberately weave Stoic ideas like acceptance, focusing on what's controllable into CBT to make it even more effective. This blend seems particularly good for anxiety, depression, stress. Anywhere. Resilience and changing thought patterns are key.
So this integration offers this really comprehensive toolkit, doesn't it? For growth, resilience, well-being, combining practical therapy techniques with deep philosophical wisdom for a more balanced, meaningful life.
Exactly. And it's likely to spread further into positive psychology, coaching, self-help. It pushes us to think about ethics and values as part of mental health, which opens up applications in business, leadership, education.
Fascinating.
It also highlights the need for more research, right? To test this integrated approach rigorously for specific conditions.
Yeah.
And to develop accessible resources. Plus, thinking about cultural adaptation, modern interpretations, training for therapists, it's a really rich area with lots of future potential.
Okay, beyond those established approaches, our sources offer two more sort of philosophical principles, specifically for tackling negative fear, those anxieties holding us back. First, the acquaintance method.
Ah, yes.
The idea here is that while fear itself is normal, the real problem is negative fear, especially the kind manufactured by fear cultures. Those patterns or attitudes using fear to manipulate.
Culturally based fears, beliefs, traditions, politics, worldviews that the sources argue can actually be dismantled through awareness, education, understanding, acquaintance,
Right.
and love. So the accordance method takes inspiration from Bertrand Russell's philosophy, knowledge by acquaintance, and that's psychological mere exposure effect. The core argument is super simple. We're naturally less afraid of things we're familiar with. The unknown is inherently scarier.
So the strategy it suggests is kind of counterintuitive but powerful. Don't run from things that scare you. Instead, actively get close to them, study them, understand them, and then neutralize the fears in them by this familiarity.
Embodying the idea that fear is not to be feared. Lean into the discomfort. Face it down. And there's good psychological backup for this. We do unconsciously prefer familiar things, people. It's a bias. Even in bad situations like toxic relationships, sometimes people find weird comfort in the familiarity, right?
Yeah, the devil you know.
Exactly. Evolutionarily, familiar usually meant safer than unknown. And psychologists even link the number of things we're acquainted with, music, foods, places, activities, to our overall happiness. Broader comfort zone, happier life.
And that mere exposure effect nails this, doesn't it? Just repeated exposure makes us like things more or fear them less.
Precisely. First noted by Fechner in 1876, then Zajac really developed it. More exposure leads to better recognition, more positive feelings. So facing your fears, getting to know them bit by bit, can literally rewire your response, make them less scary, maybe even comfortable eventually. The second powerful principle is the love-fear method. This argues that for humanity to really conquer negative fear, especially the kind that fuels conflict and manipulation, our actions need to spring from a place of love and not from hate.
That sounds profound, but how practical is it?
Well, it's presented as a practical path, and it finds support across hugely diverse traditions.
Like her.
Lao Tzu in China emphasizing compassion. The Hebrew tradition, with Rabbi Nachman's teachings, biblical ideas of love and mercy. And think of Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence. Satyagraha.
Ah, okay. So different cultures, same core idea.
Exactly. All demonstrating the power of acting from love. Showing empathy, even when facing oppression and intense fear. Showing love as a force for radical change.
So the potential is huge. The method suggests love is stronger than fear, but if we don't allow love to inspire selfless action, fear will triumph.
That's the core message. It requires a real commitment, a kind of faith in love, letting it guide us, connect us, even in scary situations, choosing connection over division, and being willing to sacrifice, if needed, for love to flourish. Believing that true courage sometimes means choosing empathy and connection, even when fear is screaming at you to protect yourself.
Wow, what an incredible sweep through this topic today. We've really journeyed through this complex landscape of fear and dread, from ancient philosophy, Kierkegaard, the Stoics, to modern neuroscience, the amygdala, those chemical signals in sweat. We've looked at its huge societal impacts shaping governments, driving global events like pandemics and wars. And crucially, we found these compelling paths to resilience. Ancient Stoicism, modern CBT, these newer philosophical ideas.
We really have seen how fear in all its forms, that immediate fight or flight, that subtle angst about freedom, that pervasive culture of fear, amplified in society, it's just woven so deeply into being human. It influences everything, from a single neuron firing up to the grand scale of global history, affecting us at every level.
And hopefully understanding all these different dimensions gives you, the listener, real power. It helps you recognize fear when it shows up, gives you clarity. Is this a genuine biological alarm, or is it some culturally constructed anxiety trying to manipulate me? And most importantly, it shows that knowledge itself, when you really understand it, apply it, is a powerful antidote to fear's negative side. It offers real pathways to more emotional resilience, better critical thinking, and just greater well-being in your life.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering how deeply fear is wired into our biology, but also embedded in our cultures, what kind of shifts could we possibly see if societies really started to embrace things like the acquaintance method and the love-fear method on a massive global scale? Could a world that actively cultivates more acquaintance, more understanding between people, and more love, more empathy-driven action genuinely reduce the grip of big societal fears, like future pandemics or the constant threat of war? Or is fear just an unavoidable part of being human? Maybe even a necessary driver for our evolution, no matter what philosophical tools we develop.
That is something truly compelling for you to ponder as you continue your own deep dive into what it means to be truly well-informed in our very complex world.